Welcome once again. I'm Liam Kennedy, your host for tonight's episode of Look Up Tonight. This is the cable show of the Orange County Astronomers, and we're one of the largest amateur astronomy clubs in the country and invite everyone to watch our show and to learn what our club is all about and how you can learn about this wonderful hobby. Orange County Astronomers has activities for all levels of amateur. Many new amateurs take part in our Beginners Astronomy program at the Centennial Heritage Museum in Santa Ana. We also hold monthly star parties locally at Black Star Canyon in addition to our large desert site outside of Anza, 30 miles east of Temecula. Another very popular activity is our monthly club meeting, which is open to the general public. Our most recent speaker at the April meeting was Mike Simmons. Mike's presented at the OCA previously on the history of Mount Wilson. This month, Mike returns to share his experiences of the way in which astronomy touches the lives of the thousands and thousands of people in Iran. Mike's record of his journey and the way in which he was greeted by the people of Iran in every town he visited is at times a surprising, touching, and a very uplifting story. In these troubled times, I think you'll find this story especially meaningful.
I've become very interested in this country since my first visit there in '99, and there are a lot of things that are very interesting, I think, to those of us who are in the United States, have our own perspective on things. When you see what it's like in other countries and other cultures where people think differently, have different resources, in particular, astronomy is, as one friend of mine in Iran says, something where we all see the same sky. It's accessible to everybody, no matter what. And it looks the same no matter what our beliefs or anything else. But still, the practice of it on the ground is affected a great deal by our culture. So I hope you find this interesting. This opening slide is just an example of some of the things that they do there in combining what is really an extraordinarily rich history and culture in this region with astronomy. First off, I'll say they don't have a lot of telescopes and so on. This is a place where when people start, they get advice not to start too quickly and buy lots of equipment, just like we say here. But instead of saying, you know, start with a 4.5-inch reflector or a 6-inch or something, there they say, just study astronomy naked eye at first. Because then when you buy binoculars from Russia or something, it's a big investment. So it's a very different perspective. So rather than the incredible deep sky stuff that we have with the people do with the Techno 3000 whatever whiz-bang telescope that Chris was showing us, they have very modest stuff, but they do excel, I think, better than anyone I've seen anywhere at this sort of thing with star trails over, in this case it happens to be an ancient Zoroastrian fire temple, a very historic place. I forget the age. It is not very old. It's perhaps 1,000 years or so. So in that area, that's sort of middle-aged. First of all, just to get oriented, if this doesn't look familiar to you, you haven't been watching CNN for the last 2 years. But one thing I will point out is that the Arabian Peninsula, which we all know, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and so on, is very, very different than just over the other side of the Persian Gulf in Iran. You'll notice first off that it's extremely mountainous. In fact, if you saw my desktop photo that I took a couple of years ago, it's an 18,000-foot mountain near Tehran, the capital up here. It's not at all. I've been over here, and I'll tell you there's a huge difference. And so it's very different, very geographically different. The people are actually completely different as well. The Aryan people came down from Central Asia some 3,000 or 4,000 years ago and settled in the area known as the Aryan Plateau, another way of saying Iranian Plateau. They then moved up into Europe and over into India and established the family of languages known as Indo-European. No relation to Arabic, except for the Arabic. As I was saying, there's some Arabic influence since the Arabs invaded just after the beginning of Islam in the 7th century, and so there's a lot of Arabic words in there, but I can tell you the Iranians are still pretty pissed about that invasion. It was 1,300 years ago, and they haven't gotten over it yet. So that's a little orientation. Now, why did I ever get involved in this place in the first place? Well, can everybody read this okay? This was the centerfold in an issue of Nojum magazine, which means astronomy. And in 1999, I went there for the total eclipse of the sun on August 11th. At first, a friend of mine who is involved in mountaineering expeditions, he's the logistics person, really the travel person. I'd gone with his group to Bolivia in '94 to climb a 21,000-foot mountain. It was in the eclipse path, which is a good way to combine a couple of interests. Very efficient that way. And he called me up and said, there's going to be an eclipse in Iran. I was just there and found out there was going to be an eclipse. You want to go lead a tour? And I said, well, you got to be kidding me. But the more I looked into it, and I'll explain some of what I found. So this was the eclipse path. Up here were all the Western Europeans and Americans, up into Turkey and farther up where there were clouds. It came down, sort of swept down the Zagros Mountains, across over the desert and off into Pakistan. And so I was up here in the mountains a little bit where it was a little cooler than August than it is down below in the desert. I visited the office of the magazine. This is their astronomy magazine, an awful lot smaller circulation, but it is in fact the only astronomy magazine in the entire Middle East, which I found very surprising because there are very active amateur communities in Jordan and some other countries there. And it's mostly staffed by volunteers and a few very overworked workers. And this is busier than usual just before the eclipse took place. This is a homemade telescope that these three put together, three of the staffers there, and the man in the middle made the decorations on the telescope. This is the eclipse issue, and of course there are lots of myths about what's happening during a total eclipse, and this reminded me of some Chinese ones that I had seen. This is just another cover, and you see what they do in combining the cultural and historic things with astronomical themes. And you see some of that done here as well with foreground shots and so on, but they really have developed something of an art there. This strange-looking dome is actually, for those of you who might recognize it, is the 100-inch telescope at Mount Wilson. That's not what our sky usually looks like. That was added in, and for those of you that really know it, you can actually tell the dome has been reversed. It's backwards, which you wouldn't think you can tell with the dome, but when I saw that, I knew it was backwards, so I'm pretty familiar with it. Before the eclipse, we went to a small city called Navand in Hamadan province, and so we went to a celebration, a sort of a sports facility there, and they were making a whole day out of the eclipse with dancing and music and things from all over the country. And as always, on the right side here we have Ayatollah Khomeini glowering at the crowd, and then the current supreme leader who actually does smile, Ayatollah Khamenei. And that was the VIP section. These are some Kurdish dancers who were performing for everybody. And of course, while I'm taking pictures of what's going on there, the locals are taking pictures of us because we were something of an oddity. This was '99. There was a little bit, their tourism industry was coming back. A couple of years later, it really took a dive, and I have to say that there aren't a lot of Americans vacationing in the Middle East these days. But there are a lot of similarities as well, and outside were the usual carnival booths and eclipse souvenir t-shirts that they were selling. There are two things interesting about this. The first one you've noticed, which is, first of all, you see Disney stuff everywhere. But there are two things wrong with this picture. One is no direct business between the U.S. and Iran because of federal sanctions, although they could buy stuff from other countries. Number two, Disney stuff and most American things are way too expensive for them. So what you notice here is that this is not Mickey Mouse, it apparently is Mikey Mouse. So in other words, it was made there or in Pakistan or something else. So you see a lot of fake stuff. But this is a communications center on the hill above the town, and this is where we're going to observe the eclipse from, which is great to get up on a high vantage point and look down on the whole town like this, looking almost in the direction that the shadow would come in. Some of the other observers. Now, The most noticeable thing, and the thing that everybody thinks about, is the women's clothing. This is not Saudi Arabia or Taliban Afghanistan. The women are supposed to cover their hair, everything but their hands and face. Things have been changing a lot, and they're really pushing the limits of the young people there. But, you know, underneath they are wearing fashionable jeans, high-heeled shoes, whatever it might be, and they just throw this cloak on over it when they go outside, and usually let it slip. And of course, these were like souvenir eclipse sunshades. Eclipse sunshade, that sounds like an oxymoron. On top of the building there is where the photographers set up. I think there were very, very few telescopes there. Mostly they're doing what they usually do with their own photographic equipment. This is a Swarovski spotting scope, 80 millimeter ED scope, so it's a really nice scope, but it happened to be mine. And it got an awful lot of attention there. There's a Thousand Oaks filter on the front of it. Now, this is my first trip there. It was relatively short. It's something like 9 or 10 days. So I was unprepared for everything that I found there. And one of the things that I had gotten used to is hearing the sound of prayer from the mosques over the loudspeakers 5 times a day. And during the eclipse, before totality occurred here, I started hearing from down below in the town the sound of the call to prayer and the prayer itself sort of wafting up the hill. It's actually, I find it really pleasing, soothing sound. They have a way of singing that's wonderful. But I knew it was the wrong time, so I asked about it and said, what are they doing? Well, this is a special prayer when there's a special natural event, giving thanks to God for this gift of a natural event like this. And they would pray during the entire thing from the beginning to the end. I said, what about during totality? So, well, they'll go out and look at that. So they're not fanatic, but they are thankful. After the eclipse, I was surprised, this is the first time it had happened, but it turned out to be a regular event, that students, young people, would come up with books and ask for my autograph. I had no idea what it was that they wanted. I still don't really know. I just know that everywhere you go, people approach you. They are, believe it or not, nobody believes this, extremely pro-American. So you can sort of forget about all the sound bites you see. There are even explanations for that, what you see on the news. And they just want some sort of a souvenir that shows that they met an American here. And after the eclipse, here is the special issue, the eclipse issue of Astronomy magazine again. And this was another example of the same sort of thing. We're visiting a historic site, and this is a school class, a field trip. And I asked my friend, is it okay if I take a picture of them? Because I didn't know if it was sensitive to take pictures of the women and so on. He went over, it's one of those places where you have to be careful what you say you want, because they'll make sure that you get it. It's known as excessive hospitality. You really have to be careful. And so they all lined up and let me take a picture. But then as soon as that was over, they all wanted to come around and ask questions. And usually it's, we're so glad you're here. You know, we love Americans and the culture. What did you think of Iran before? What do you think of us now? And so on. So this sets a little bit of the background. Now there are some astronomy facilities. This is a small observatory in northern Tehran, a fairly well-to-do area. And it's a very pleasant setting. Now, it's a fairly big dome. This is a very nice telescope. It's a Zeiss Maksudov. It's been there for quite a long time, probably since the Shah's time. I think it's a 6-inch. It's a very small scope for that size of dome, but it is a very good one with the Zeiss turret and everything else. The other thing you'll notice is the people that are there. This is an educational facility. It's all, except for the one young man, it's all young women. This is the rule, generally. When you go to a star party here, what do you see? Guys with gray beards like me, because we've been in astronomy for 30 years. It's older, not so old, but, you know, older men. Mature men like me. But in Iran, it's mostly young women. You never see anybody over the age of 30, and it's mostly women. Exactly why it's women, I don't know. There's an explanation for why it's usually young people, though. This young man in particular, he was 11 years old at the time, and this is the type of thing they do. They really are more serious in many ways, and this is one of the other interesting differences. They would ask me after talks or something during Q&A, what do American amateurs do? What kind of projects do they do? And it was hard to answer because what most of us do or have always done is we go out with as big a telescope as we can get and look for you to push that button on the control that says find obscure NGC object, or get a $10,000 CCD camera and spend, take a few images and then spend the next few months processing them to make them look like they were taken by the Keck. Successfully, quite often. They don't have those options, and it's sort of a more basic interest. They're interested in at a more basic level like I was and some of you may have been when we were kids a few years ago. And so what he actually did, he had a small telescope, and what he did was plot. He would study the stars, and he'd make his own little star chart here in, can't read the numbers, but it's in Coma. Yeah, I think this is Coma cluster. And so then he would look in the eyepiece and he would map what he saw as far as the galaxies there and mark them. And that's the kind of thing that they would do. They do a lot of public outreach as well. This is another science center in Tehran. I found this interesting for the juxtaposition of this ancient, very famous alchemist from several hundred years ago and the model of DNA next to him. And that's the kind of juxtaposition and contradictions that you see everywhere there. At the same science center also, they did have what is a pretty big telescope there, a 10-inch LX200. They have a pier pouring down at the base down below here, but then the tripod's set up over that because they don't have a pier for it. And this is just open to the public, and it's used for public observing. I was there during the planetary alignment in May 2002, so there was a lot to look at then. At the same place, they have a planetarium as well. Not quite like what Chris will have on the Queen Mary. In fact, they couldn't afford a real planetarium in a sense, so what they did was got up there on the ceiling and painted this on. So this is sort of homemade, and I believe there are little lights behind some of the big brightest stars, but I don't recall that. And here's a little bit, this picture shows you what they did. And it's really extraordinarily beautiful. And then they made these models of the planets too. So this is the kind of thing they would do when they wanted something, but they just certainly didn't have the money to be able to do it. And the result to me I thought was tremendous. So that's how they do planetarium shows. There are some planetariums there, and I'll show you some of those, but they're limited. This is a special high school, and one that a friend of mine teaches at, so I visited there. And here they have various kinds of sundials, like the one in the front, and other things with the sun, like a solar oven here, which looked like it could be used to bring down large birds or something. So they had a lot of science projects there, and these are pretty advanced kids. And they actually, this is very unusual, they have a few different telescopes here. It's a very privileged school. This is actually a school where some of the government leaders' sons go. And education up to college is segregated, boys and girls. Colleges may or may not be, depending on what kind of a school. If it's a religious seminary, they're segregated. If it's a more reform type place, then they're not. There's also a science museum that was there, and again, it's sort of a basic kind of stuff. In their Hall of Flight here, a Wright Flyer, and Lilienthal glider, and something older, which I forget who it was that flew around in that thing. Edwin Kelly? I don't recall. Oh, and a model of a Sputnik over here, I think. And another school trip. So this is a docent at the museum. Extremely well-behaved kids. They also had like a human-sized kaleidoscope. So I had to go in there and take as many pictures of myself as I could in one shot. So it's fun. And this is the director of the Science Foundation. making use of one of the other simple things that they have there. So basically the idea is they do a lot with little, and it sort of reminds me of, 40 years ago here, something like that, before all the electronics got involved. Well, anything American is generally good. I was really surprised that this is very well known. It's very unusual. There is no McDonald's. There is no Coca-Cola. In fact, there's no Pepsi-Cola or Coca-Cola anymore. They have instead Parsi-Cola. Parsi meaning Persian, which is Iran used to be called Persia until less than 100 years ago. And so I guess they try and make American-style fast food, but I don't usually eat it here, and I wasn't going to try it there. And in the Islamic Republic, they also have beer, and it's advertised everywhere. It's non-alcoholic, however. And I only know it's beer because they told me, because once I tasted it, I can only say, if you go to Iran and you like beer, don't drink this stuff. But I guess they don't know any better. In fact, well, that's another misconception too. If you want beer, you can get beer. You can't order it in a restaurant or something, but anybody who wants it has it in their home. So everything just sort of moved inside. Another thing that you see quite often, again, just cultural, and the differences in culture, I think. You see these murals and pictures, large and small, shrines of all kinds of things, of martyrs. And the martyrs are generally soldiers that died during the Iraq-Iran war, which killed up to 500,000 Iranian men, really devastated the country for quite a long time. These are very common to see. You notice also even here there are astronomical themes. There's always the idea of heaven, and there are planets and so on. And so it's sort of a more literal depiction of heaven, perhaps. Okay, here's something ancient and astronomical. This is a Kuduru stone, which is a boundary stone. And this is in the National Archaeological Museum, the National Museum of Iran. This is about 3,000 years old. But what's interesting about it is these different symbols on here, some of which you may recognize as used, here's the moon for instance, in astronomy today. These are the first known use of these symbols, the first written use, the earliest known use of these symbols anywhere. So this is during the, if anybody knows it, the Kassite dynasty, long before Persia began. Okay, well this is, I just throw this in, that's my break, because when we travel from one city to another, usually we're so exhausted everybody falls asleep on the way, so we're leaving Tehran at this point. These are friends from Germany, Gernot Meiser and Pascal Demy, who will be back with us again this year. In Shiraz we visited. They revere the poets, and this is Hafez, the most famous of all. People come to pray, even just to touch the tomb. And the poetry is to the Iranians like opera is to the Italians. It's an integral part of all of their lives. But what we find here also is the scarf covering the hair, but with, who is that, Donald Duck and Minnie Mouse, it looks like? So again, you see that everywhere. And another tomb, a pilgrimage site of Sadi, a mystic poet. So this is an important cultural thing. But again, also the culture, and this is something that pervades everything, including how they see science and astronomy and everything else. It's very important to them. This struck me that what this is some teenagers who had not only visited the poet's tomb, but were very quietly studying his poetry in the script in the tile nearby. And there aren't that many teenagers here who you'd catch reading poetry in the tomb walls. And people would come to actually pray over, and this is not a religious figure buried here, it's simply a mystic poet of 12th century, I think. Mm-hmm. Okay, one other cultural thing here that I'll go through fairly quickly because it is interesting too, and it shows some of the misconceptions. There are, well, I don't know how to say it, there are dead people on display everywhere. It's part of the Shiite religion, and they're not really on display, but their tombs are there. This is a very important one, so he's got a very big tomb. It was a relative of Muhammad. I happened to catch some of the nomads there. There are nomads roaming the country just like there always have been. But in this case, you see the cultures are completely different. They wear these extremely bright clothes, and they only cover them up with the chadar when they come into town. Nobody bothers them when they're away from the town, but you come into a religious site, you have to be very careful like this. And we've all seen this sort of a business here. There are these horrible loudspeakers on the back of this truck playing some sort of religious music, and people following behind it, beating themselves with chains. This is the celebration, the anniversary of the death of Muhammad or something like that. But, you know, you look at these people, nobody's in pain. They look kind of bored, and in fact, when you're there, it resembles line dancing more than anything else. And I don't say that as a joke, it really does. They have this sort of a movement, and they do it, and they move on, and they look kind of bored and so on, and it's a sort of a thing you do, but there is nobody crying over this. And you notice that as you get towards the end of the line, the mourners get younger and younger and younger, so even the little ones have their own tiny little pint-sized chains to beat themselves with. I've seen 5-year-olds there. So again, what you see on the news is not always what it's really like there. It's more a cultural thing, nothing fanatic about it. It's more like an Easter egg hunt than anything else. So now this is one of the few telescope and optics makers around. Telescope making is really in kind of its infancy in Iran, but it seems to me it would be very important because it's very hard for them to get things. So this shot belongs to Musa here, and I don't know, I don't recall what he was making with this. It looks like that's a tool rather than the blank, but he was certainly making something big. But he's one of the few, he's basically an amateur telescope maker who decided to go into business for himself, and I hope that he succeeds with it. He also makes some beautiful things like this, which he presented to us. If you go there, you have to literally buy an extra piece of luggage to bring gifts back. And this is one which is now at our home. Just a prototype. Now this actually is interesting. This observatory is at Shiraz University in the south, and it's called Biruni Observatory after a famous astronomer, Islamic astronomer from several centuries ago. And this is in fact got the largest telescope in the country inside of it. These are some of the students who are there. This is typical, by the way. You know, the bangs aren't supposed to show, but nobody worries about it. They're wearing makeup. The coats have kind of crept up until now they're above the knee. So there's nothing very. Some people will wear, you know, are very religious and they'll wear everything, but others they just sort of don't bother. And the reason they get away with it now is that after the revolution, just over 20 years ago, there were 35 million people in the country. And Khomeini wanted everybody to have more children to become soldiers for the revolution, to spread it out throughout the region. Well, after he closed the nightclubs and the theaters and everything else that was fun to do, I guess they figured, children, okay, that's something to do. And so 20 years later, they had twice as many people in the country. Well, the problem is now they've got 70 million people, and 70% of them are under the age of 30. None of them remember the revolution, nor what it was like in the Shah's time. They don't care about the religion that much. They care about their culture. They're extremely proud and nationalistic. But they have the internet, they have satellite TV dishes, and they're really more interested in going to the U.S. or something else than they are in the religion. So now they're pushing the limits, and there's really nothing that the hardliners can do about it. It's just a matter of time. It's a slow, quiet revolution. Nobody wants it will change, and there's no question about that. But nobody wants a violent revolution like last time. So this telescope is a 20-inch Cassegrain. It was made in the 1970s by, I think the name was Astromechanical in Houston, Texas. Maybe somebody else here remembers the company. I recall it from when I was a young amateur astronomer, but it was purchased by an American who was teaching at Shiraz University at the time, and has stayed involved even though he's now back in the U.S., but will be over there next month for the conference we're going to attend. So this is a 20-inch Cassegrain. There is a 24-inch somewhere else in the country, but it's not operating. So this is the biggest one that they have. And here, of course, there are a lot of amateurs with bigger telescopes than this. Here's the photometer that they are still using, photomultiplier tube, and 1P21 probably. It's ancient. I haven't seen one of these operating in a long time, but they keep it going, and they've got a very active graduate program doing variable star work. So they make do with what they have, but I can tell you, nobody would use this here now. You're better off with a modern CCD camera for photometry. Oh, and everywhere you go, we were there, I gave a little talk, they threw out enough food there for more than about 10 times as many people as were there. So that's always part of their hospitality. There are also ruins just about everywhere. This happens to be at the first capital of the Persian Empire. It's about 2,500 years old. This is one of the ancient palaces. There's only one of the pillars that's still standing. But this is the kind of place where they go for astronomy. They observe from amongst these things, and they take nighttime pictures, maybe illuminating the columns and so on. And I'll have a collection of some of those later on. This is the most famous of all, Persepolis, which is about 100 years newer, and was burned down by Alexander the Great when he invaded Persia. And a few more things, and this just of historical notes, these engravings, not engravings, they stand out from the stone. Relief? Bas-relief, okay, thank you. And this is close up, and each one of these is historically correct. It represents one of the different types of people who were subjects in the Persian Empire at the time, coming to see the king, bringing gifts of sheep or various other things in very fine detail, close to life size. And this is a very common theme, the horse or unicorn and the lion. But nobody's quite sure exactly what it means, and it may have some astronomical theme after all too. It could be a bull and a lion. Some people think that has to do with Leo and Taurus and how they are in the sky, and how as the sky turns, the Leo sort of comes down on top of Taurus, but they haven't been able to confirm that. The tombs of the kings or the very old shahs are built into the sides of buildings, of mountains like this, and there are in fact some areas where it's sort of like a valley of the kings, and another place where they like to go to observe amongst the history of their country. This is something you see commonly everywhere. Just throw out a tablecloth and put some food down and have a picnic. That could be any place, could even be on a sidewalk someplace. They're very oriented towards nature. Another part of the astronomy, I think, because astronomy is really a part of nature, and while we don't think of ourselves as nature lovers by going out at night and looking at the sky, it really is part of nature, so to them it all ties together. These are in fact more of the tombs with the kings inside here. You can see the very large door sort of dwarfed by everything else. Oh, and so we stopped for a break at a traditional tea house where you sit on a platform and drink tea and smoke a water pipe if you want to, and the doorman in a traditional outfit. Although every traditional outfit is different because there's so many different cultures that have crossed through there that they all have their own dress. There are 70 different languages spoken. And again, here you see the older guy using an abacus and the younger guy using the electronic calculator. So we were a little tired when we left there. Once again, here's my friend Hassan wearing his astronomical t-shirt with stuff all over. I think he got that at RTMC one year or something. He's actually an American citizen as well. We visited a small town. This is a rural town where they're more conservative, agricultural town that's sort of out in the middle of the desert. But this town is different. This town has gone crazy over astronomy. I've never heard of anything like this in the entire world. And here they welcome the arrival of the astronomers of the USA and Germany, our two friends, to our city in English as well as in Farsi. So we stopped to take pictures of that because we thought that was incredible. But little did we know that everywhere we went there would be more signs. This was the place where we were going to speak to a crowd there. And they were just thrilled to have us there and to have this contact with scientists as they viewed us from America and from Western Europe. And in fact, this sign was particularly noteworthy because it was by the Bazari, meaning the business people of the town. These are the most conservative. And for them to have put up a sign welcoming Americans to this little conservative town they thought was really remarkable. There was another thing they were going to do to show us the very highest honor. I found out about this later, but our friends from Tehran talked them out of it, which was they were going to slaughter an animal for us when we arrived. And apparently they were going to honor us by not having it be a sheep or something, but a cow. And the vegetarians amongst us would have probably not appreciated that, but he had to convince them that this is probably not the best thing to do, but still it was an honor. My wife started to grab some pictures of this, so they're very slow exposures and they're very hard to see. Before we spoke, there was a very religious sort of a film. I didn't understand what was going on. I would see people in Mecca going around the Qibla, the tomb there, various religious things, various things showing human life, what the world is all about, but interspersed with a lot of heavenly types of things like this. And the announcer, the narrator is sort of droning on in this very poetic sort of a voice that they use. I have no idea what he was saying, but there were a number of these images. So to them, actually, it always brought to mind the heavens declare the glory of God from one of our Psalms, and they sort of take it a step farther, and it becomes a part of everything that they do when they are talking about the greatness of the universe and so on. Here we are meeting in front of this town. Now this town, when I say that they have gone crazy over astronomy, there's one teacher there who has started an astronomy program. He's gotten it to the point where he's got the whole town involved in astronomy, and in fact they're building an observatory which is being funded entirely by the townsfolk. The women are selling their jewelry to raise money, so there's no government funds or anything. So this is really extraordinary. Now this is the youngest member of their astronomy club and the oldest, and I suppose he's the most average. I don't know why he's... And here I am speaking with my friend Barak, the Iranian flag, and a picture of President Khatami, the Reform president who was overwhelmingly elected by the populace to make some changes, and who's disappointed everybody by not being able to. And you can see it was an interesting view of the audience. In fact, it was mostly segregated by, these are students largely, so it's segregated by men and women, except in the front here are the town leaders, the mayor, some reporters who asked me political questions, the leader of Friday Prayer, who's the highest religious figure. In fact, I was expected to speak in the mosque, and in between prayers, they have astronomy slideshows in between prayers during Friday. This would be like having a break in a Catholic Mass and then having a slideshow. And so they wanted me to speak there, which would have been a great honor. My friends knew, I don't think they knew I'm Jewish, but I don't suppose it would matter. It would be something to tell the congregation if I ever joined one here. And everywhere I went, there are television cameras, news reporters, and so on. It really was to them tremendous news to have us there. And here was a school which we had to go visit. This was a girls' school. Now we were on our little bus and we pulled up and we were sort of taken around from one thing to another. Sometimes you feel like you're on display, but they're so extremely happy and grateful to have you there. I stepped off the bus to take this picture, and these girls stayed there and waved to everybody, but then when my wife stepped off, they swarmed around her. And you can see she can never keep that scarf covering all her hair, but they just sort of laugh and pass it off. So there are flowers passed to her, autographs, and things like that. This is at a local college where they put us up for the night, and again, more autographs from the students there, for the students. Their English is frequently very good. So we took a little drive up to see their observatory, and along the way, the street was lined with welcoming signs. And this one we had to stop. They had written painted this wall white and then put in the original Arabic, Farsi, and English from the Holy Quran, "Do they not look up to heaven above them, how we have made it and adorned it?" And again, it reminds me of that phrase from the Psalm. It's the same idea. So this is very important and something which is, of course, is universal. This kind of thing makes it, to me, we always say astronomy is something that is universal, but these kinds of experiences make you realize that it really does, there are no boundaries, and it crosses over those boundaries on Earth. And inside their observatory, which is Aliabad, is like a suburb of their town. And this is the view from there. Just around to the left there are some nomads encamped with their sheep and so on in their tents. And the townspeople are building this. Now, some of these people make a living doing this sort of thing. So some of them were volunteers, but the ones who were doing this instead of their usual jobs would actually get paid half as much as usual. They donate half their time to this. And the teacher who started this whole fanatical thing is here, Kabiri. He's really a remarkable person just from what he has accomplished. I'm not able to speak with him very much because we don't speak each other's languages, but he's a very quiet man. He just has revolutionized and energized this whole town with this particular spirit there, and there's very much more going on. I did notice also that these are all boys up here. I imagine he's only teaching boys. I don't know. I'm not sure. As far as education goes, the girls get the same education. In fact, in universities, women outnumber men in Iran by 3-2, 60% of women in the universities. So they are not underprivileged in that way, but in this case, it was only the boys up there. And this, I don't know where they got this, a C11, which is an extraordinary telescope for that area. You know, since they're so interested in astronomy, and it's so important when they have a star party, it's announced in the mosque and everything else. We're going to have a star party, everybody come out. And I asked the question, what about lighting? Since everybody is so interested in astronomy, do they do anything with their lighting? I was thinking in terms of what we do. Are they using full cutoff lights or something? Probably it's bare bulbs, but I wondered if they paid more attention to their lighting. But he took the question a different way. When I said, what about lights, for astronomy? He said, oh, well, when we have an important star party, we call up the government and they turn the power off to the town. So you see, there are things to be envious of. I said, well, what do the people say about that? He said, oh, well, they don't know. It happens all the time. So we left this town very, very well satisfied. It's a place I'm going to go back to next month. And I look forward to it. It's really extraordinary, the enthusiasm. It's one of the reasons why I enjoy the things that I'm doing in Iran, because they are so enthusiastic and they have so little that the appreciation is really extraordinary. It's like a tremendous investment. Every little thing you do goes a long way because it's just soaked up. We went out to the east. There are a couple of interesting things here. This is in a town called Neshabur. It's the hometown of Omar Khayyam, and it's near Mashhad, and it's about 100 miles from Afghanistan. And so it's very Central Asian looking, and this is a typical sort of person you see there. And it really felt very much more like being in Afghanistan or something like that. That's really, really what it's like. This is a student who is one of our hosts there. Typically Persian look. And this is in fact Parsi Cola. Looks a lot like Pepsi Cola. Coca-Cola has become Zam Zam. And they basically have two kinds of drinks there, black and orange. That's the black. Orange is like Crush. And this, in fact, this was in a town that is so small, it's like a one-horse town. It's like one road. So here at this special facility, we welcome the arrival of Honorable Master of Astronomy to Nishapur, birthplace of great scientist Hakim Omar Khayyam, who many of you will know the name as a poet, but he's also a mathematician and astronomer. very important, and this was his birthplace. I told my German friend he could be the honorable master because I didn't feel up to the task. And of course we had to meet with the leaders of the town, and we were hosted at a small agricultural university there where they wanted to show us around. Oh, yeah, this is nothing to do with astronomy. It's a good story. This guy here, basically he was with us the whole trip, but it turns out nobody amongst our hosts knew who he was. But in small towns like this, especially in areas that are close to like Afghanistan and Americans are visiting, nobody wants to ask. So he just, there are two theories. One is that he worked for the intelligence ministry, and he just showed up at the airport when we came in, and nobody ever asked him who he was. He just came along. My wife's theory is that he saw there was a group of people here, and he knew there was going to be free food. And I have to say that her theory was given a little credence when on the last day I had lunch with the head of the information ministry, which is a euphemism for intelligence, and he didn't know who the guy was either. So, anyway, but you know, I have to say, even if you think that people may be watching or they're suspicious, you're in a place where they're suspicious, they wonder why an American would want to come here and so on, there isn't any danger to it. You just sort of shrug your shoulders and say, you know, it's an odd thing, but nothing happens, you know, you just pass it off. That's very unusual, though. It's not the way it usually is there. And here at the agricultural school, they had a big computer lab, and they were using the internet to do some research, and here the student is looking at the Kellogg's website. Now, this is the tomb of Omar Khayyam. So it's a little bit on topic with astronomy because he is a great astronomer. This is a modern covering over the tomb. I think it's gorgeous. Some of the people didn't like it because it's too modern. It's not traditional. This guy has been dead for, 900 years, I think. This is actually the celebration, the annual celebration of Omar Khayyam. I don't think they know what his birth date is, so they pick a day and they do it then. And we had been invited out there because of this special day. This is my friend Hassan sitting in front of me. So if you knew him, it would be even funnier, believe me. I just had to take that. So, and this is a very small part of the crowd that was there. There were a few thousand people there, lines of television cameras. It's very big news. And so we were sitting here, and there were some Afghani musicians up there waiting to play. There had been recitations and so on. And so somebody is speaking in Farsi, and I can't understand it. And then all of a sudden I hear Mount Wilson Observatory. And I go, oh no. And so then I hear my name, and all of a sudden, without any warning, somebody comes up and tells my friend that they want me to come up and speak. And this is a big thing. So I go up there. They don't tell me what to say, how long to say it, anything else. I just simply said, knowing Persians as I did by then, that I thanked them for the welcome. They enjoyed their country. Their hospitality was wonderful. They're extremely proud, and hospitality is so important. And so I basically thanked them, and as I walked back, people were reaching out to thank me for my comments and to touch me and so on. And so it worked out well, but it was a shaky moment there for a little while. Now this is the tomb. Later during the daytime, people would put flowers. In fact, I'd been invited up with the dignitaries who had traveled from other places to lay flowers on the tomb during a special ceremony. And here's a mullah with a few women who could all be his wives for all I know. And perhaps this is his daughter, but I got a close-up look at her because there we are, Mickey Mouse. It's quite pervasive. Now these are the plans for a planetarium. Nishapur is a small place. It's a few 100,000 people, and it's quite isolated except for Mashhad, which is one of the biggest cities in Iran nearby. But this is a huge planetarium, and it's just a block away from the tomb, so it's done in that style. It's under construction, or was then. I went inside. This is a planetarium. It's not a nuclear reactor. Although I did tend to glow a little bit when I came back out. But it's a very large, I believe it's 20 meters, and it's like 66 feet across, and stadium seating, and it's going to be an incredible facility. The only thing we just don't see how it can be supported that far out. But this is the director. He lived in London for a long time. They have architects and other people who are all lived in the U.S. or London, and this is their hometown. They came back to build this thing. So it's really quite extraordinary. And I'm hoping to find out on this next trip how they did. This is another tomb. You'll see this in some of the pictures I'm going to show. It's called an Imamzadeh. It's an important religious person, and the size and how elaborate the thing is depends on how important the person was. And people come and they just travel to these things and pay homage. And here's my wife standing out in her white coat at the time, and up to her knees, and white tennis shoes. And she's speaking with some of the people there, because you're approached all the time by people when they see you there. And they wanted their picture taken with her new best friend. And here's the bazaar also. I have to show you a little bit of this, because this is another bit of contrast. So you keep going away from astronomy a little, although, again, I think the culture is what makes the difference in how they view science. So this is a few hundred years old, which is not very old by Iranian standards, but it's a traditional bazaar. But you can see, I didn't take any pictures into it, but you look into some of them and it looks like a Save-On drugstore or something. It's got all the stuff people go there to buy. It's just the mini mall. But there are traditional things there as well, such as this shepherd's outfit, which is meant to keep them warm in the hills of this very cold, remote, mountainous region. And it looks like it would be great for astronomy, in fact. I should have bought it, except I'd probably take a whole suitcase just to bring that back. And while most of the people will go into a shoe store that looks like something we're familiar with, I spotted this older guy fixing shoes in his little shop. And this is a contrast here too. You know, people, they've been invaded from every direction for the last few thousand years, and people go back and forth. It's a real crossroads. And these kids were just following us around. The kids aren't shy. They come up, they follow you around, they giggle, they want their picture taken, they run away, they come back. And these were three best buddies. Now, this one really looks Persian, but this one looks to me more Indian, because we're not far from Pakistan, and this one looks more Mongolian, more Chinese. And we're in an area where all of those come together. And then the whole area through Central Asia, you see this mix as you move just a little ways. So the cultures mix that way. And of course, here's some kind of fake Nike thing from Jobshan Sport. Just Do It, 2000 Nike Air. Not from the US and probably not licensed to them either. A street musician, only in this case a traditional instrument which is either Persian or Afghani, and there seems to be an argument raging about that. But I thought it was just an incredible face, and I like to take pictures of them. And so that was a really tiring trip. And so one last place, and I will finish up. Esfahan, this is the most beautiful city of all. It's known as the jewel of the Middle East. This is taken from the balcony where the Shahs used to watch the polo matches. Polo has been stripped out and the fountains put in instead. There are mosques on 3 different sides. So this is actually the largest open-air square in the world. And this is the Imam Mosque is what it's called now. Any reference to Shah has been taken away and replaced with Imam, referring to Ayatollah Khomeini. And the tiles here, these minarets are over 100 feet high. But all the way up to the top, they have this kind of detail in them, in the tiles. And this lapis lazuli and yellow is traditional of Esfahan. I see it now, and I know it comes from Esfahan. It's just really extraordinary. It took an awful long time to build this. There are more things about the mosques I'd like to show, but there's not enough time. This is really an extraordinarily beautiful city. This is astronomical in nature, in a way. This is a noon indicator. This runs north and south exactly. And during the morning, the shadow of this will be on this side. When the shadow reaches the point here where it just disappears, they know that it is local noon. So that's astronomical. The reason they want to know that is that's when noon prayer is supposed to begin. So they don't use that now. They're going to use an atomic clock or something, or GPS or whatever, but that's what it was there for a few hundred years ago. The Esfahan has got a very nice river with some 30 or so bridges running across it, and these are, people stroll there in the evenings. It's a very hot place in summer. Spring is nice. And the families tend to go there, and men will lay out in the middle of it, and there are actually shops and tea houses down below on the lower level. It's much cooler there. We visited the Astronomical Society there. I believe it's bigger than OCA, in fact. I think it was 900 or 1,000 members. And somehow I found that they had a picture of me on my deck at my home. So hopefully it was just that one of my friends gave them this picture of me. But it had various things about me here, and I could pick out a couple of words and see that it was me, but I can't really tell if they're saying bad things about me. And I wasn't giving a talk, we were just visiting, but to them that was a big event as well, and we were guests of the city. And here they have an Ariane and a space shuttle, as well as many other displays and things from around the world from other astronomical societies. But this is their most common astronomy activity. A star party, but not like we do here. We do public star parties here. That's what they do most of the time. This is a huge club. They have their own headquarters. They're well supported by the municipality. And on the roof of their headquarters, they bring out some of the many telescopes that they have, and they hold a star party for the public. Now, this was during the alignment of the planets in May of 2002, so there was a lot to look at, and you'll see everything's pointed towards the west where the planets are. Big telescopes, small telescopes. I asked them if they ever take some of these scopes out to the dark skies, because they're on the edge of the desert. They can get into extraordinarily inky black skies fairly quickly. And they kind of look kind of funny, like, yeah, some people do that sometimes. But really the outreach, the educational aspect, it's the knowledge, the interest of it that interests them. And so this is what they usually do. Sometimes they'll actually have activities where they make posters, other displays, anything for public outreach and education. This is one of the 5 12, I think it's a 12-inch LX200, or is that a 10? I've forgotten now. But they're like 5. The largest telescope I know of in private hands is an 8-inch, and there are probably less than 30 in the country. They're just too expensive and hard to get. The city of Esfahan out behind us. And the moon and a few of the planets, Venus and Jupiter, I think, and I don't remember what's where now. Maybe Chris will remember it. I've forgotten. So from there we traveled back to Tehran. I wanted to throw in just a couple of things because it's so unusual. These are the these are Kurdish nomads traveling just like they always did. They crossed the highways. They travel along the same routes. But when we stopped to take pictures of them, they came up to invite us. People always do, they invite you to their home for dinner. You can't possibly eat enough dinners to satisfy the people you meet there. They invited us to tea in their tent. It's just what they have. This is a typical transportation in small town areas, agricultural areas. And of course we couldn't speak with each other, but he saw me in my camera. He tapped the donkey with a stick and he stopped, and I took the picture, he tapped it and he went on, and that was it. The historical things, this is many centuries old. They were going to build something here. Nobody knows exactly what it was for. But I throw this in to show you an idea of the scale of some of these things. Here's one of our friends standing down here. So this would have been, if you've seen, for instance, Abu Simbel in Egypt, this would have dwarfed it. But nobody knows exactly what it would have been. This is another Imamzadeh, a place where people would stop. This is on a high pass on the way through the mountains. People would stop here and visit the tomb of whoever it was and get something to drink, and it's a good place to rest. But we passed this way again at night, and so I got a picture of this by the glow of these lights, a little bit of twilight, and Venus and Jupiter above it. And this says Allah. And always stopping for a break for tea, which is quite refreshing. The mountains are really quite extraordinary, especially in spring. This was May of 2002. This is an 18,000-foot mountain that's visible from Tehran. Not at all the desert that most of us think of. The only place I've been that has as much variety geographically is California. Tehran is ringed by 12 to 15,000 foot mountains. And they even have ski areas up in here. This is Dizin. Of course, we stopped for tea from the little shack that somebody sets up there. It's always refreshing. And this is sort of a richer ski area. It's actually pretty well known, even outside of Iran. Well, I took this not because of this house, but because there happens to be a Sasanian fort built above it, which is about 6th or 7th century. And they're just everywhere. One side of the mountains is barren and desert like we're used to out in our own deserts. The other side, where the rain comes in, is lush. They refer to it as a rainforest. I don't know if it's quite that wet, but it's wet enough near the Caspian Sea here to grow rice. So they're increasing their own rice production. And the Caspian seashore, where the men wear bathing suits and the women wear those god-awful coats and things. So they actually, women are in many ways, in most ways, doing better than they were under the Shah, in many ways. But this is not one of them. And in fact, what they do during the summer, this was spring, it was too early, is they put up partitions so the women can have their side and they can do whatever they want to over there. Okay, now I realize those two pictures together look kind of funny. I didn't realize it till this moment. Whoops. Oh, this thing is, I tapped on here. IBM has a new thing where it detects motion in the computer in the laptop and shuts the hard drive off. This is a very important part of astronomy there. I think I'm running over, so I'll get through this very quickly. These are commercially made in Isfahan. These are Iranian-made 150 millimeter binoculars, and they are using these to sight the early moon. It's very important in Islam. This is a workshop for early moon sighting about how it can be seen when and where. It's an annual workshop. Religiously, it's very important because the Arabic calendar starts each month with the sighting of the new moon. In fact, the Persian calendar is solar like ours. It's the only one that's actually astronomically based. It begins at the beginning of spring, the first day of spring. They call it Nowruz. It's at the vernal equinox. Everybody stays up till whenever it happens to be. That's when their New Year's celebration is. And it goes on for 13 days, so they know how to party. But the early moon sighting has become a very important cultural aspect, and it's something which the young astronomers there like to do because it's something they can do with binoculars they can get a hold of. That's something like 30 hours old, so as a photograph, that's pretty early. Well, I think this is the final sequence, that you may be glad to know, but you have to see some of their astrophotography. In this case, it's Orion, either rising or setting behind this tree, and I believe it's Leonid meteors in here as well. This photograph taken where at a popular place out in the Great Desert, a national park, they hold star parties on the roof of this, I believe it's 800-year-old royal palace. A very dark place, of course, and there we have Orion again. And honestly, I think I've seen this kind of thing from here, but they've really fine-tuned. It's a real art for them. Both that last one and this one are both Damavand, the highest peak in Iran. It's something of a special symbolism like Fuji. These are a famous sort of tulip in the foreground. I've tried this, getting the lighting on foreground objects and still getting stars and so on. It takes a lot of experience. This is what's known as a caravanserai. It's a resting place for people along the caravan routes. These are, as my archaeologist friend says, these are new. They're 300 or 400 years old. because the Erie he studies 2,500 years ago. But they often have star parties at these places. These are Leonids. I think there's 7 meteors in here. This is in Esfahan, where they're famous, one of their most famous bridges across the river, and the planets again in alignment, and I can't identify which is which. This, in fact, is a lunar eclipse, January 2001, I think it was. And this simple structure in the front is the tomb of Cyrus the Great, the founder of the Persian Empire. He wanted something very simple, and this is at Pasargad, his capital. I'll just mention that the Venus transit, Dave was saying, you couldn't remember where I was going. This is where I'll be for observing the Venus transit, set up next to Cyrus's tomb, because for one thing, it's close to the guard shack, so there's power. I don't have anything to add to these.
Are these pictures taken by locals now?
In Iran? Yeah, most of these were taken by a couple of really good photographers that I know. In fact, if you're interested, I'm helping them host a website where you can buy prints of these. And they've given me some, and they're really, really striking. So these scans don't do them justice sometimes, but I can tell you where that is. Well, the Venus transit I'll just mention, I won't go into all of this. We've had 6 Venus transits since the telescope was invented. Only 5 of them have been observed, and that one of them only by 2 people. So this will be the first one in 122 years. And the reason I bring that up is, and this is not the reason for the talk, but the timing is good, so I'll mention it. If you look here, the entire transit is visible. Of course, well, I should say, the transit of Venus. Venus goes directly across in front of the sun. Hasn't happened during the lifetime of anybody alive today. And so it'll be the first one. None occurred in the 20th century. The entire event from beginning to end will be visible in this area. The sun at mid-transit will be directly over this spot in the Earth. That's right over about Oman on the Persian Gulf. So this is Iran right touching that little symbol there. So when I saw this a couple years ago, I said, that's where I'm going to go. And the last slide, if you want to see my webpage with lots of pictures and stories and things, Nojum magazine, they have an English page. And if you're interested in coming along with us for the Venus transit and a tour and same sort of activities as you saw here, our webpage for that is at the bottom, and I have some brochures over there that you're welcome to take with you and think about it. So that is the last of them. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike. Wow, I don't know about you, but Mike's presentation really hit me right here. I know I'm not the only one who was inspired and affected by the story he tells. The OCA is sending a set of these cable shows on DVD over to a couple of the astronomy clubs that Mike visited. We hope this will provide our fellow amateur astronomers in Iran with access to some of the great presentations we enjoy every month. Thank you for joining us this evening. We're looking forward to seeing you again at our very special main meeting featuring a presentation by Charlotte Herschel Farquharson, the great-great-great-granddaughter of Sir William Herschel, the discoverer of the planet Uranus. Charlotte will present not only on the famed planet discoverer, but will also feature the achievements of many other family members. You'll be surprised to hear how the Herschel family is directly connected with the science of fingerprinting, the photographic process, and the contact lens, to name but a few. Until next time, get outside and look up tonight.